Welcome to Take Up Space, coming into full expression with courage and beauty. Our world needs conscious, fully engaged women like you who are ready to show up authentically with all your precious and unique gifts. The antidote to toxic structures that seek to silence our voices is to be audaciously unapologetic in expressing your full radiance and beauty. And this summit offers a doorway of creative transformation to support you in stepping into your power. Be inspired by the gathering of courageous women leaders who are here to show you the way. Gain new perspectives and practical takeaways so that you can embrace the full spectrum expression of the divine feminine in a way that is uniquely aligned to you. I'm your host for this event, Irene Chong, and today I'm very excited to present Katie Emma, who'll be sharing more on cultivating courage, how Mars encourages us to take up space. Katie Emma is a professional astrologer and the founder of Temple of Cosmic Astrology School. She's passionate about teaching others the skills to divine the language of the cosmos and to empower students to grow and evolve in alignment with their own natal chart, a sacred and cosmic blueprint. Temple of Cosmic Astrology School was founded in 2017 during Katie's Saturn return, and her school embodies a transpersonal and humanistic approach to astrology. Through her various programs and courses, Katie encourages students to use astrology as a tool to inspire, awaken, and transform, with a particular focus on the evolutionary outer planet cycles and their collective influence. Over the past 13 years, Katie has been teaching astrology courses, workshops, and in-person retreats in her home country, Australia, as well as in Bali, the UK, and Portugal, where she's now based. Katie Emma, welcome. Now, you're quite the digital nomad and someone who takes after my own heart. I imagine you have some interesting stories to share. So let's kickstart our conversation with this question. What was your biggest challenge around expressing your truth? And what enabled you to courageously show up in your full authenticity?
Irene, firstly, thank you so much for that lovely introduction and thank you for hosting me today. I'm so looking forward to being here. And goodness, I love this question. It's such an empowering and amazing question. I feel like for me, part of my bio just tapped into that, I think, but definitely showing up in the midst of my Saturn return and creating my astrology school, I think became such a beautiful pathway for me to really, share my message and speak about what I'm most passionate about, which is astrology. And it's something that I've been practicing since such a young child, like 10, 12 years old. I think I started exploring it. And I was a professional astrologer for most of my 20s, but really around my Saturn return, when I was faced with my own initiation of being an adult, what is the meaning of my life for me? What do I want to show up here? How do I want to take up space? And I realized that teaching astrology is what really lights me up. Working with clients one-on-one is beautiful. I love exploring people's charts, but teaching people and empowering them to find this information for themselves and to run with it and to create beautiful things in their life absolutely makes me feel aligned with that question that you asked. So Irene, thank you.
Beautiful. I love how, it was your Saturn return that got you thinking about what is it that you really want to do with your life and that courageous commitment to take up space, to come online and share your teachings in such a visible way. I think that's very inspiring. But also I'm thinking of courage, because it is a courageous action to take. So that brings us to your topic for today, which I find to be a really interesting one. And I can't wait to dive deeper into what Mars is all about. So let me just, invite you to share your understanding of Mars. What is it about this planet and its planetary energetic influence that inspires and cultivates courage? And is this really, a core part of our birth chart that helps us to take up space?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, when I was sitting with the theme of your talk, I was like, how can I bring astrology into this concept of, having courage, taking up space, working with courage and beauty? And I felt like Mars was really calling me into that. I was even just sitting with my own chart, where do I feel called to action in alignment with this topic? And Mars is the planet of drive, inspiration, passion. It really encourages us to embody you know, our message, our empowerment, and, you know, our own personal pathway with that. And that's kind of the angle I wanted to take with this summit talk today, was to help people find their own personal message with that. Because sometimes when we think of courage, we think, oh gosh, I have to be, really assertive, or, maybe I'm too aggressive, or maybe I'm too passive aggressive, and I don't really know how to stand up for myself in ways that feel authentically aligned with myself. And I think that by learning our Mars sign, but also like the house that it's in, or for those that are more seasoned astrologers, perhaps what aspects you have to your natal Mars, you can really find a sense of personal empowerment in your relationship to having courage, rather than feeling maybe, shame, or feeling like how you approach courage is somehow wrong or misaligned. But it's about finding your own truth, your own passion and purpose, and ultimately inspiration to engage with life full force and head on, which is what Mars is really all about.
I really love that. And like you, I really see astrology and understanding our own natal birth chart as a way to help us find our own truth, right? When it comes to expressing our truth, first of all, we need to gain clarity on what is our truth. And I love how you spoke about Mars as helping us to personally empower ourselves. So why don't you share a little bit more about the Mars placement in our charts for someone who is new to this and wondering, what can Mars teach me about courage and truth?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's important first with Mars to understand, how long its transits are, how long it spends in each sign, because Mars is considered in astrology a personal planet. So, it's pretty, it's within orbit of the sun, right? It's quite close to Earth. It's the next planet on from us. And it has a much more personal impact on us than, say, our Pluto placement or our Uranus placement, which are part of generational cycles. So, working with, of course, Mars, but also Venus and Mercury tells you a lot about, how you navigate and move through the world in a very personal, relatable kind of way. But what is interesting about Mars is that it's the first planet that we get to that sort of starts to move away from the sun a little bit. And what I mean by that is that Mercury and Venus are always moving very closely to the sun. Your Venus sign, your Mercury sign will always be quite close to that sun sign placement. But Mars can be located in any of the 12 signs. So it can be opposite your sun, it can be square your sun, sextile, trine. For those of you that are more beginners, don't worry too much about that terminology. We'll get a bit more into that. But Mars spends 6 to 8 weeks in each sign. And therefore, it takes about 2 years, just over 2 years if there's a retrograde, to move through the entire zodiac. So, with Mars transiting each of your houses in astrology, every, say, month and a half to 2 months, you have an opportunity to show up and engage with the world by transit Mars in a different way. So, for example, right now as we speak, Mars is in its ruling sign of Aries. Mars is super happy to be there at the moment. It's, in a sign that allows it to move with the force and the tenacity that it was built for. So, for all of us, wherever Aries is in your own chart, or perhaps by the time this summit is coming out, I will say it could also be in Taurus by that time. So, let's say Aries Taurus, this is showing you where life is calling upon you to show up full force with engagement, with purpose and passion to, really feel inspired by your life. And the house will be different for all of us. So, Irene, does that kind of help give a little bit more of a well-rounded approach of how Mars can, just like as an introduction to bring up Mars?
Yes, I think it was really useful to speak of the 2 year cycle that Mars takes because it immediately got me thinking about, our development, especially when we were children. There is this phase of life that's known as the terrible twos. And I see that, well, that would be the first Mars return. And it's about feeling empowered to say no. And, often children, when they're still growing and developing and learning, it's almost like that is our first encounter where we learn how to set up boundaries and to say no. And it's actually an important developmental phase. But it also got me thinking that a lot of children, especially girls, right, we're taught to play nice. We're taught to be obedient and follow the rules and to say yes. So it could be that our Mars was stunted in its growth. And, earlier on, you spoke about being passive aggressive. And I was like, yeah, that is definitely a problem and an issue that I think a lot of women face. They don't want to be seen as too aggressive. And they haven't quite, perhaps, there is a distinction, right, between being aggressive versus being assertive. But this is something that I think a lot of women can potentially struggle with. I know that I did. So yeah, speaking to the cycle, that was really helpful. And I'm wondering if there's anything else you wanted to add on to what I just shared, because I could see you like nodding away and like
Yeah, I was. I wanted to say I really loved how you sort of correlated that to the terrible twos. I've never thought of it like that, but I'm like, damn, that's actually really impactful because it's such a challenging year for all children, right? Even the quietest baby becomes this, roaring toddler and is finding their self-expression. And as parents, not that I'm a parent, but I can imagine it's extremely challenging to go through that phase. But how important is it for us children to have the space to be able to move through whatever it is that we're feeling? And often we don't have the words, the voice, or the ability to really kind of get our message across. And so every 2 years we start to build our confidence around that. And I do agree, particularly as women, it can be, I don't want to say necessarily more challenging, but it is definitely a challenge to find our voice in that capacity because we are taught often to be more passive, maybe not necessarily to not speak up, but there's a lot of polite masking, I think, that goes on for pretty much all women. And those of you that have Mars in a more kind of masculine or expressive sign maybe felt very early on in your life limited or put down because you were automatically perceived in your assertiveness as, well, frankly, I'm going to say it, as being a bitch, right? Like that can often come up as a bit of an unfortunate, perspective and a very unfair one, right? But something that I think many of you watching this may be nodding your head and agreeing with and feeling like, how do I navigate, speaking about what's important to me, advocating for myself, advocating for the needs of others, whilst most likely stepping on a few toes along the way or being perceived as selfish. And I think that learning about your own Mars placement, the sign, the house, can help you come to a point of hopefully more ease and comfortability in expressing yourself in that way without the fear of being perceived as aggressive, for example. So, yeah, that's what I think is really the healing path of finding our courage with our Mars sign, because it's okay to sometimes step on toes. We don't want to go out actively hurting or harming people, but we are allowed to have a voice, an opinion, to speak our truth, right? And astrology can be such a personal pathway to tune into the best way for you to show up authentically in that pathway.
I loved how you use this word. So Mars is often seen as like warrior energy, but you use the word advocate. And I really like that because that to me is like the intelligent, inspired Mars in action, where we're advocating for ourselves. There is the idea of taking a firm stand for our rights, for our desires, to voice our opinions in a healthy, assertive way. And there's something very beautiful about the Mars energy because, even though this summit and the work that I do is in devotion to the sacred feminine, it's not about getting rid of the masculine at all. We carry both the masculine and the feminine energetics in us, and it's all about integrating these two energetics in a healthy way. So I love the fact that you're speaking to using Mars, using our understanding of how Mars operates in our charts, so that we can be personally empowered to take up space, to give voice to our needs, our desires, our opinions, etc. Mm,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I can even just say, about myself that, I have my sun in my 12th house. So by nature, I am more, inclined to be reserved, quiet, introspective. I need a lot of alone time to sort of reflect on all the busy engagements of my day. But my Mars is in Sagittarius. It's in a fire sign. It's like up there near my midheaven. My Saturn that I spoke about earlier, with my Saturn return being aligned with creating Temple of Cosmic Astrology School, that's also in Sagittarius, the sign of truth, but also the sign of sometimes, being a little bit blunt, right? Not meaning to, not wanting to cause harm, but sometimes just saying it like it is and forgetting that that doesn't always land with people in the way that maybe you intended it. And so, in my own pathway of embracing my Mars and understanding that part of myself, I definitely did have to step on a few toes in a way that also taught me, okay, like I am feeling my way through what it means to be assertive, and sometimes my bluntness isn't always well received. So, how can I then also learn to, not change who I am, but find an approach that sort of supports that pathway of assertiveness for me, but I don't kind of run roughshod over everybody, and it's quite an interesting sort of thing I recognize in my chart because I'm so introspective and so quiet, but this Mars energy for me in my 10th house shows up the most through my work as an astrologer. In terms of my legacy, there's a lot of drive and tenacity for creating something and leaving this world with something I hope beautiful and courageous left behind. And that comes through my work as an astrologer. So, for those of you listening to this, find where Mars is in your natal chart, because that house will show you where life is calling or beckoning upon you to show up and advocate for yourself, to speak your truth, to maybe hurt a few feelings along the way, not with a negative intention, right? But from the fact of like, okay, maybe that's not quite the right approach, but maybe this becomes the right approach as you start to feel into that. Because, yes, for many women, it is a work in progress, right? It may not be a part of ourselves that we are naturally attuned to, depending, of course, on our own life circumstances, depending on what sign or element it's in. There's many variables, of course. But I promise you that it is a part of your chart that is just waiting for you to tune into and tap into and empower you ultimately. I really love Mars. I think it's such a often untapped part of the natal chart. We get so caught up in Venus or, what's the moon doing? But look at your Mars if you want to create something. There's such power in our Mars sign.
yeah, so let's delve deeper into how someone can approach and learn more about how Mars operates in her chart. So, obviously, we have an audience that spans a range of uh, being beginners to astrology, and those who are more seasoned. So, do you have any tips, any suggestions for what to look out for if someone is curious about how Mars is expressed in their chart? Earlier on, you've spoken about houses and signs. Do you want to also speak a little bit to speak to a little bit about aspects?
Yeah, of course. So, firstly, I just want to say that what I am so passionate about as an astrologer and why I want to teach it is because when we get past sun sign astrology, we recognize like how vast and truly personalized astrology can become. Like, sure, we might all, a bunch of us could be Aries or Taurus or Cancer, for example, but where does that energy sit for you? What are the other planets doing in, as Irene said, in aspect to that? And so, for those of you that are a little bit more beginner, I will just explain it as in, say that your Mars is like my own, it's in Sagittarius, as I said. I also have Saturn and Uranus there, which means that I have conjunctions or kind of close conjunctions between these planets. So, when I'm coming to understand my own Mars sign, I can't really engage with it or speak about it without also factoring in the Saturnian presence that I have there, the Uranian influence, or my own Mars is also trine my moon. My moon is in Leo. So I also can't engage with my Mars or understand what Mars means to me without going, oh, my Leo moon is being drawn into this story by a trine. And a trine is a supportive or harmonious influence. So when I recognized that I had that particular aspect in my chart, I was so grateful for it, especially as a 12th house sun, somebody who, really has had a lot of big life lessons around coming out of my shell, finding my sense of comfortability. When I recognized that my moon and my Mars are like great pals, they're here to help each other out. It really opened a lot of doorways to me where Mars is in my chart, which, as I said, is my 10th house, my legacy, showing up as a teacher, the founder of my school, and ultimately welcoming in the beautiful students who work with me. And most importantly, I love it when my students start to teach me astrology. I don't feel that I'm a good teacher unless I have students that ask me questions that maybe I don't know. That like lights up my Mars. I go, wow, I'm not quite sure about that, but let me sit with it. Let me investigate it. Let me dive into this, because I think that ultimately students, as they are growing their understanding of astrology or whatever it is that you may be teaching, a sign of the students really integrating that is starting to reflect back to the teacher their own understanding of that pathway. And again, I think that Mars really factors into this because Mars is such a driving force towards what we want to initiate in life. And, many of my students are here to initiate understanding themselves, empowering themselves. And so Mars becomes really important in that journey.
I just had to pause right there because I was busy taking notes. This point about how Mars helps us to understand what it is that we desire to initiate. And everything they're talking here, I love how holistic it is because you're not just saying, oh, we only look at Mars in silo, but it's also important to look at the aspects and what it says and the kind of blends or harmony that Mars may have. So using the example of that conjunction that you have and then the harmonious trine and what possibilities that may encompass. So what about if someone knows that she has a tense or a hard aspect with Mars? What possibilities are there for us? What empowering lessons can we learn when we have challenging aspects to our Mars placement?
Sure, Irene, I love that question because I love exploring the challenging aspects, to be honest. I think that there's so much like wisdom and power hiding behind what challenges us. And I think it's easy sometimes, to want to look at all the pretty, pleasant little adornments in life, right? But often the most transformation that we go through comes from when we have what we say in astrology are squares and oppositions. So an opposition is easy to understand, right? It's two planets opposing each other. And a square is when they are at around a 90-degree angle from each other. And so the square is really the most tense aspect that we can have. So perhaps you have Mars, square your Pluto in your natal chart. You could have Mars square your moon, your sun, for example. And the square becomes challenging because if we think of like even the shape of a square, right, where that angle is meeting, it's like they're coming from the same um, perspective, I want to say, because a square comes from planets that are what we call the modality. Okay, so just to give you a little insight into that quickly, we have the three modalities: cardinal, fixed, and mutable. So if you have two planets, say we're talking about Aries and Cancer, okay, if you have Mars in Aries and the moon in Cancer and they're within a degree range, they will square each other. So they're both cardinal. But the difference or the challenge becomes Aries is fire, right? Aries is all about charging forth, acting now, thinking later, where Cancer is very introspective, moody, sensitive. It's all about the feeling, right? And it's water. And so, what happens when we bring fire and water together? We usually end up with a fire being put out, right? And so, these two energies don't really align that well, but the commonality becomes that cardinal energy. And so, cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, are the initiators. They are the natural leaders. They show up and stand up in their truth around the approach that would be their element, right? So, fire, earth, air, and water. So understanding that when you're unpacking a square is really important first before you even figure out what the planets are coming into it, because you need to understand the energetics behind it. Yeah. And so it can be challenging in this example I gave of working with fire and water, because there's one part of you that's all about, being lit up and inspired and taking action. And then you have this other sensitive part that's like, maybe don't do that, or it overthinks, or it can be sometimes, a little bit of a wet blanket. And so it can be hard to navigate that energy internally within yourself, right? And so it's really important when we have squares to understand that it is not a race, I think, that we are getting to. It is our natural growth and evolution, and that is inherently a part of you. It's not about casting aside that square and thinking, I'm broken, I have a square, what's wrong with me? It's about embodying what that transformation and lesson is telling you, relevant to the planets that are coming into that aspect. But usually with Mars, I will say that with a Mars square, usually the planet that is squaring it is teaching you a lesson about usually tempering your Mars in some capacity. There is a tendency to kind of feel backed into a corner with a square, I feel, as well. Again, it's that sort of angle, right? The other planet makes us feel a little bit backed into a corner. And what do we do when we're backed into a corner? We tend to retaliate or we react, right? And so you may go through experiences in your life where you feel like you overcompensate, or you react in ways that later on you think, oh, that didn't feel so good, did it? But what are you learning through the process of the way that you engage with that energy? And just to wrap up with that, an opposition, of course, means that a planet is opposing your Mars. So your Mars energy wants to run off and do one thing, and your other planet opposing it is like, no, hey, I want to go over here. And so you can feel this tug of war in between you, right? And that can be extremely challenging when it is a planet or archetype such as Mars, because all Mars wants to do is lead. Mars wants to be that sort of, not center of attention, but like it's the leader, the natural leader. It feels it knows the right way. So when another planet is opposing that, it can be a sort of a fine balance between Mars sort of letting go of the reins a little bit. And what helps in opposition is to think of it as a bridge, because we're still working with the same modality. Okay, so for this example, we would be talking about, say, Aries and Libra. They naturally oppose each other. But what helps in opposition, and what I feel makes it a little bit easier than a square, is that in this example, again, we're working with fire and Aries, but Libra is an air sign. So fire and air actually complement each other. So we do have this battle of wills, a battle of ego, right? Because we've got two natural leaders sort of, battling it out. But when it's fire and air, or of course the other option would be earth and water, elementally, energetically, they're sort of saying the same thing, but in a different way. So if we really tune into and listen to what the other is saying, whether it's externally, somebody else, or whether it's an internal conversation, that is how we can kind of bridge some of the more combative energy of Mars and tap into that natural assertiveness and empowerment that we have, rather than feeling like we want to, again, run roughshod over everybody, even if we're not consciously doing that, right?
Oh, this is great. I'm so glad I asked that question. And, I was really inspired to ask that for two reasons. Number one, I do have tense aspects in my chart with my natal Mars. So that was one reason why I was curious. But the other thing also is because I'm thinking about Mars as our drive and passion. And, I think of Mars as that warrior energy, as I mentioned earlier. And also the idea of, you use words like battling, being combative, and Mars can very much represent that energy. So what happens when there is a challenging or a tense aspect? I think it really helps to, as you said, temper our Mars. The way I see it, it helps with our growth and evolution, because it gets us to express our Mars in a more refined way. When I think of tempering, I think of that sword that's forged in the fire, and the challenging aspects as, Mars being made to go through the fire so that it can emerge stronger and wiser. So thank you for speaking into that. I also really love how you spoke about the elements and then the modalities as well. That was very, very helpful. And I thought, why don't we try to concretize it for the audience, especially for those who are new and are picking stuff out. I mean, you are such a great teacher because you make it really accessible. So let's use an example, and I'll just use my example to concretize and anchor this teaching that you're sharing. So my Mars is in Capricorn, which is cardinal Earth. And then it has a square to my Saturn in Scorpio. And it's mutually receptive, right? There's mutual reception here in that Mars is the traditional ruler of Scorpio, and Saturn is seen as the ruler of Capricorn. But I've always found it a challenge. And when you mentioned the having to temper, I found that I really needed to do that because sometimes, especially when I was young, my Mars could come out as pretty headstrong. And I'm not sure whether it's defiant or rebellious, but it was seen that way by my adult caretakers. And I found that I needed to temper it with the wisdom, with the caution of Saturn. So I'm just wondering whether, you have any insights that you like to add when you have such a challenging or tense aspect.
Yeah, definitely, Irene. And I just wanted to just double check with you. Sorry, what sign did you say your Saturn was in?
It's in 0 degrees of Scorpio, and it's in a square to my Capricorn Mars.
Okay, so it's an out of sign square
It's an
because
out of
normally, yeah. So normally, just for those of you that are more beginner, normally a square, as the way I explained it, is they share a modality. Okay, so they're both going to be cardinal, fixed, or mutable. In Irene's example, because of the degrees, she technically has a square, but it is actually coming in from what would be signs that are sextile. Okay, so I won't go too much deeper into this because it gets a little bit complex and convoluted, but we can, of course, have, occasions where the square won't be exactly matching on that modality basis, but it doesn't mean that energetically the energy isn't present. So that takes us more into degree astrology. But absolutely, I think that what helps this a little bit for you, Irene, is that mutual reception that you spoke of that happens between these signs and their rulers. But with Mars square Saturn, this can be challenging because, again, Mars naturally wants to assert itself. It wants to be quite forthcoming. It's very motivated and has a lot of, natural skills of leadership, particularly in Capricorn. But with a square to Saturn, Saturn is all about restriction, and Saturn is about taking, our time and integrating things. And Mars is just like, I don't have time to sit around and, take the firmer, longer path. I want to do it now, right? And so the inner tension can really bubble to the surface a lot. Like things may not have happened for you, Irene, as quickly as you wanted, particularly I would say before your Saturn return, right? Usually when we get to our Saturn return, 28, 29, 30 years old, that's when we're really confronted with, working with our own, timeline and pathways, and how empowering it can be when we stop comparing our life to other people and really run from the frequency of our own growth and evolution. So I feel, Irene, and you can share this with the audience, but do you feel that maybe some of that hurried energy or that frustration did shift for you sort of bit by bit, I would say, over the decade of your 30s? Did you, or as you moved through being 30, like, did you sort of feel that eased a little bit?
That was beautiful and so spot on, Katie. I think you have just demonstrated the value and the power of
Yeah.
astrology right there. Because yes, that Mars in me, I often saw it as this impetuousness, wanting things to be quick and fast and just get it done. And I've had to learn the Saturnian lesson of taking my time, taking things step by step, not rushing into things, and letting things grow in time. So being patient, the wisdom of waiting, that was a key lesson for me. And definitely, I think by the time I hit my 30s, I was finding my stride. Early on, you were talking about how we can use Mars to help us take up space. What I've come to learn and to see and to appreciate about myself is that I do have all this drive and energy with my Mars exalted in Capricorn. But at the same time, I also have this tenacity to wait things out, to just keep doing the work, to keep plodding on, so to speak, and then trust and understand that the fruits of my labor will come in time, that the harvest is there, and to have that faith. So, that is just one aspect. And I do realize that, yeah, it doesn't, using this placement, this particular square, you don't have the modalities. But also, just to add, I also have Mars square my Pluto in Libra. So add that to the mix, and you have like, oh, fireworks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Mars square Pluto is a big one. And funnily enough, I have a lot of friends actually who are a couple of years younger than me, and they have that square between their Aquarius Mars and their Pluto in Scorpio. So it's energy that I'm around a lot with other people. And I find that, Mars square Pluto people, I mean, intense definitely comes into it. The sign will always shift that a little bit. But I find that these are some of the most driven, tenacious, even humanitarian. Like, again, maybe I'm speaking more because these people are like Mars in Aquarius, but I want to say that usually, no matter what the sign is, this square empowers people to really fight for the underdog. And I think that's kind of what comes into this perspective of activism I speak of. There is like a yearning and a desire, usually through your own challenges that you've moved through, to become a space holder for others, to share their stories, to have a platform to be able to speak about what's important to them, or to, again, to be an activist for something that's important to you, and to show up in those spaces as a way forward. I find that's often the bigger picture growth that comes from that particular square. But of course, before again, before the Saturn return, even though Saturn isn't in that exact square, I just find for most of us, right, it's usually a bit of a hard slog navigating these things. But the gift, of course, of the Saturn return, which could be a whole other topic, is that we start to feel more comfortable within ourselves, right? We start to actually find ways to cultivate that courage and to embody that, and to not be afraid of feeling small anymore, or being afraid of taking a path that looks different than the one we thought we would take or was expected for us to take. And Mars is such a brilliant cheerleader for us to encourage and motivate us to fulfill that journey within ourselves. It's beautiful energy.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, it is precisely oftentimes the challenges that we face with our Mars that gets us, like, it becomes the fuel that drives us to do what we are doing. And when you spoke of, that Mars square Pluto, the challenges inherent in that are oftentimes what drives us to more humanitarian causes, like fighting and championing for the underdog. And that's the beauty of understanding how Mars works in our charts. So having said all of this, I'm really excited because I know that you have a meditation to take us through, to help us get a sense of how Mars operates in our natal chart. So let me now invite you to take the space and lead us through an activation so that we can each get a deeper energetic sense of Mars working in our charts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to think of just a more sort of creative and engaging way to connect with our Mars. And especially because in a summit like this, I'm speaking to many people, it can't be as personalized for every listener. And this is a visualization that I like to do a lot, even on retreats that I host and spaces that I work in that are, in person. I think it's really fun to just have someone guide us to that particular energy within our chart, and to find messages that come through our own guidance and intuition. Because as an astrologer, I can, of course, get very left brained, right? And I can tell you, oh, this means that, and read this book, and Mars here means that. But what is your own, like, feeling and connection to that energy? What is your own pathway of embodiment? So, this is just a really short visualization. It's not a really deep meditation. It will maybe take about 10 minutes. So, I encourage you all just to take a breath, even myself, and just going to kind of just soften. We can close our eyes. I'm going to close mine too, because it probably feels a bit strange looking down the camera when everyone else is in this meditative space. So, if we all just close our eyes and just feel our body just softening, just maybe stretching anything out, fingers, toes, getting comfortable. And just bringing your awareness to your breath and just sort of bringing a conscious, awareness to your Mars sign, to your Mars placement, and thinking about the house that you have your Mars in. And so it's important to remember this house as we go through this visualization. If you don't know this information right now, too, you can always come back to this part of the recording and sit through this again. But we're going to be working with the house. So remember the number of the house as we go through this visualization. So as you bring awareness to your breath, feel a connection to your sacral and root chakras. Mars is a powerhouse and a driving force in our life, and therefore has a correlation to the lower chakras. Particularly, I feel the sacral, because it is that driving force, that oomph. And just feel your breath coming into this part of your body. And just breathing that energy from the sacral up through your spine and back down through your feet. And again, moving that energy through your feet and into your sacral, and bringing it up through the spine and through your crown. And we'll just spend a few moments just feeling into this energy and this connection with yourself and your sacral and your Mars energy. And just see yourself now walking towards a circular temple. And as you take a few steps up inside of this temple and you walk through the door, you find yourself in a beautiful circular room with 12 doorways around the outside. And as you look up above you, you see a blanket of stars and planets and the cosmos. And beneath you, you're walking on beautiful crystal floor. Perhaps there's signs and symbols that are carved into this floor that have special and personal meaning to you. And from the center of this room, you see a stairway leading to each of these doorways on an upper floor. And each of these doorways has a correlation to the houses of your astrology chart. And behind one of these doors is your Mars sign, your Mars placement. Perhaps you have other planets in this sign as well. Maybe it's a busy house for you. Or maybe Mars is just hanging out there all on its lonesome. And as we still keep our awareness on our breath, I want you to just feel yourself moving up these stairs and heading towards this doorway. And you notice that the door is ajar, beckoning you forth into this space. And as you walk through this doorway where your Mars sign lives, take note of how this room feels and presents itself to you. Perhaps there is certain signatures that correspond with the archetype of your Mars sign. Perhaps there's colors, feelings, emotions that feel invigorating to you as you step into this Mars temple. And in the center of a room, you notice that there is a box and a key. And within this box is a message for you around how you can find your courage with your Mars sign. It is a message to you from Mars to guide you, encourage you, support you, and cheer you on as you move through your life in more engaged ways. And so you use the key to unlock this box and just take a few moments in this space to sit with what is revealed to you. For some, it may be a color, others a symbol, perhaps a person is in the room with you, or a person comes to mind that inspires you. This will be deeply personal to each of you listening to this. When you feel ready, you can give thanks for what you have received through this visualization. And know that this is a place that you can return to whenever you need to find your motivation or your courage or your belief in yourself and your ability to lead, show up in your life in more meaningful ways. And that through this simple visualization, you can access that part of yourself and maybe what feels hidden or out of arm's reach at different points in your life, and that you can always access this inner reserve at any time. And so just bringing your awareness to your breath again as you give thanks for what you have seen and what has been revealed. And you close the lid of the box and you lock it, but this time you keep the key with you as you travel back down the stairs and into the circular room, just taking any notice again of any visuals, colors, feelings, revelations, and breathing deeply up through the crown and back down through your sacral and through your feet. And now bringing your breath down into your Earth Star chakra, helping you to ground this message, embody what you have received, and ultimately to have the confidence to show up and engage with your supportive Mars energy. And breathing back now through the Earth Star chakra, through your feet, into your sacral, through your crown, and back to your sacral. And just gently come back now, wiggling your fingers and your toes, with a message of empowerment from your Mars sign.
That was absolutely beautiful, Katie. I was
Thank you.
transported into quite another realm, and I love, love, love the creative visualization that you guided us through. So I'll share my experience and also invite and encourage the audience who's watching this to just take notes of the messages that they received and to really sit with the downloads that came through. So it was really interesting because the visualization in itself was beautiful and reminded me of the awe and wonder I always get when I find myself learning about astrology. It's really, unlocking the secrets of the heavens, of the cosmos. And there's so many beautiful teachings from the universe in store for us, when we are willing and ready to access them. So let me just try my best to summarize what was quite a deep journey. My Mars is in the 11th house in Capricorn, as I've mentioned. And when I entered the doorway, it was really interesting because I've never experienced my Mars in this way before. I felt like I was in this vast, expansive sea or ocean. And at first I was wondering why. And then I was reminded that, okay, Capricorn is the sign of the sea goat. And I found myself in a barge or a ship. And when you highlighted, the box, right? And I opened it up, what I got was, yes, I do have my Mars in a square to both my Saturn and Pluto. These are not easy aspects. But when I opened up the box and I found the key, and it was actually a key inside the box, it reminded me that, oh, wait a minute, I have my Jupiter in Scorpio, which is in a beautiful sextile with my Mars in Capricorn. And it's really interesting because with Mars in the 11th house, it's meant to be visible, public for the community, working, in a humanitarian aspect. And I know that for me, a huge struggle has been putting myself out there. I've had a lot of visibility challenges and always feeling that, I didn't quite fit in or belong in the conventional society that I was brought up in. And it's taken me a while to realize what suits me, a more Uranian, Aquarian kind of, 11th house sort of themed communities. That's what works for me. And then in my capacity as teacher and coach, what I was also getting is that, it's one of the things that we as entrepreneurs learn. Um, Not everybody will resonate with us. So on top of that, right, on top of visibility, having to confront traumas around rejection. So I know that my Mars in the 11th house really had to work with that. So when it came to my Jupiter in Scorpio, I was sensing into, and for the audience who's watching this, right, Jupiter represents our gifts. It is also the ruling planet of my chart. So it's a big planet for me, both literally and metaphorically. And I was tuning into the gifts that are there, and it got me to see that, oh, you know what? The people who most resonate with the work that I put out there and that I offer are people who desire to go deep. They're not afraid and they're willing to confront their shadows, to own their projections. Like these are the women I find time and time again that resonate most deeply with my work and with the services that I provide. Whereas, there are women who don't quite resonate and they're not the right fit for me, even though we may resonate in other areas. But because there is that aspect where I just really, really want to go deep, I don't like the surface level kind of work. It got me to see like the message that I got was, oh, I can stay true to my path and I don't have to be afraid and I don't have to shy away from my message because the right people will resonate with it. So that was a really beautiful gift and message and takeaway for me. And it has given me not just courage, but a lot of hope and faith. So yeah, just to say thank you, Katie. What a beautiful journey and gift that was.
You're so welcome, Irene. Like, thank you just for that beautiful share. It's lovely to hear in real time how how that experience and what it revealed for you, that embodied approach. And, I love, with that Jupiter in Scorpio, as you said, of course, you require a lot of depth, in the people that you connect with and want to work with. And you also said Jupiter is your ruling planet. So are you a Pisces rising? Yeah, so am I. So that's why I was just like in my mind, I was like, when you said Capricorn in your 11th, I was like, Capricorn's in my 11th. So a lot of what you shared just really resonated too, because I also have moved through similar things of just like certain people, and I think we can all say this, of course, some people resonate with us and others don't. But when we have Jupiter as the ruling planet, and then as you said, for you personally, Jupiter in a harmonious sextile, a supportive energy to your Mars, this Mars in Capricorn in the 11th becomes a really important part of your story and your work and how you connect and engage with communities with that 11th house space being activated. Because just like I spoke of earlier, with like, is your Mars in any aspects to a particular planet? With your chart ruler, then in that connection, right? Like we can't look at your chart ruler as a Pisces rising without talking about Mars for you, Irene, right? Where I'm also Pisces rising, but my Jupiter is in my second house, which funnily enough is trine my Mars in Sagittarius. So I love that for both of us. But yeah, we can't just ever read a singular planet for what it is. There is always some kind of other energy and dynamic coming into it. And so I hope for all of you that just listen to that or are going to come back and re-listen, with a little bit more information about your own Mars, that you can also have something quite revelatory come to you in how you can engage and show up most impactfully and most aligned and ultimately like empowered and content with that aspect of yourself. But thank you, Irene. Such a beautiful share.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to something that you mentioned earlier, because, prior to the meditation, you were saying that yes, astrology can be very left brain. There are all these technical aspects that we look at. But what I love and what I bring into my natal chart readings as well is that intuitive right brain element. Because, like this journey alone, right, that takes us to that imaginal realm where we're connecting energetically with that planetary aspect that we're working with. Um, rather than just looking from a very scientific and technical level, because of course, I'm familiar with the placement of my Mars and its aspect to Jupiter. But in that guided visualization, I feel as if I have embodied this sextile in a much deeper, more embodied way. That, it got into my cells in a way that all the books that I've read, all the readings that I've had done, didn't quite emphasize. So I'd really, really urge the attendees who are watching this to give themselves the opportunity to go through this guided meditation. And also just to say that I feel that in our conversation, as we're wrapping things up, I feel that you have very beautifully captured some of the simplicity by talking about what Mars represents and how it operates in our chart. And then we also went to a lot of nuanced complexities of aspects and modalities, elements, etc. So I definitely feel that this conversation bears a repeated listen. There's only so much we can take in the first time round. So I'd urge, especially beginner astrologers, if they're curious and interested, to not give up if they find it a bit challenging to absorb. This is something that takes, it's taken us both decades to really learn and master, and we're still continuing to master. But the rewards of fully, finally understanding how our chart works and how Mars operates in our lives, I cannot begin to emphasize the transformational potential that can have for us. And so this brings me to the beautiful gift that you have prepared for audiences who are attending this summit, Katie. And that is a workbook. It's a mini Mars workbook to help you integrate everything that you've learned in this summit interview so that you can activate courage with your Mars sign and transits. Katie, would you like to share a few words about why you created this and what kind of support our attendees can receive when they sign up for this gift?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love creating workbooks. When I teach my casual classes, they always come with like an accompanying workbook on the topic that we learn. And so when Irene invited me to this summit and said, that I would be bringing along a free gift, I was like, it has to be a workbook, So I've created this mini Mars workbook and it's full of lots of useful information for both beginners and also more advanced astrologers. So through it, I've covered, just a little bit about like what Mars is, how it shows up for us. And one interesting part of it that we didn't touch on as much in this conversation, but Mars is doing a lot of work at the end of 2024 because it's going to be stationing retrograde in both Leo and Cancer. So in this workbook, I've also got a section to support you in working through a Mars retrograde cycle, which is if Mars is all about moving forward and initiating and its life force, well, when it's retrograde, suddenly Mars gets a bit agitated and frustrated because it has to go backwards. And that's just not how Mars likes to function. And so Mars will be going backwards or, encouraging you to reflect and rehash things in your life relevant to your Leo and Cancer houses as we close out 2024 and move into 2025. So the workbook will also touch on that for you. And then I've got, I think, 8 or 9 journal prompts to support you in working with your own natal chart, working with these retrogrades, understanding your Mars placement, and ultimately finding your courage through Mars and through astrology.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Katie, for especially creating this workbook for summit attendees who are watching this. So I highly encourage all of you who are watching this to sign up on the link right below and receive this complimentary gift. So with everything that we've covered so far, I'm so grateful and absolutely in deep appreciation of the wisdom and the expertise that you've brought in your teachings on Mars. And I'm just wondering if we had to have one key takeaway that you'd like to leave summit attendees with, what would that be?
Sure. So I think that in general, Astrology can be such a nourishing and supportive um, influence and practice for you, because it really helps to personalize your own evolution, your own journey. And I hope that through this conversation with Mars today, that you can understand your Mars placement as being your biggest cheerleader. You know, in those moments where you're maybe feeling really demotivated or frustrated or misaligned, that by tuning into your Mars energy, you can, respark what maybe has felt dimmed or lost, or just, as I said earlier, just kind of out of arm's reach. And especially in 2024, we have been given this beautiful opportunity to go back to our Leo house, our Cancer house, to regenerate and bring through something new and inspiring and exciting, in our Mars energy. And also take note of like how that Leo and Cancer energy is also speaking to your natal Mars energy too. Remember those squares, conjunctions, oppositions. There's going to be deeper influence and messages there for you with the transits as well as that natal energy.
Beautiful. There's so much magic in everything that you've said right there. And coming back to the theme of this summit, I'm just thinking of how powerful Mars as an ally and a cheerleader can be when we want to take up space, right? That decisive action that we need to take. Understanding how Mars can work, or how we can work with Mars in our natal chart, can really be that decisive factor in our success. So thank you so much once again, Katie, for being here with us and sharing your wisdom and your gifts. And also a huge thank you to all attendees who are watching this. Stay tuned for yet another amazing lineup of speakers and interviews.